Racial inequality is an enduring social problem in our society. White Americans have privileges in our culture based simply on the color of their skin. Most white Americans aren't really aware of these privileges that they carry. Certainly we don't think about them on a frequent basis. But what happens if we do? What would happen if we made white Americans seriously consider the privileges that they carry around with them? So would that result in, for example, a motivation for white Americans to work toward reducing that inequality, maybe even improve intergroup attitudes? We predict that in the context of heightened awareness of white privilege, white Americans made to feel efficacious to reduce inequality would experience greater collective guilt and in turn have improved intergroup attitudes and engage in more anti-discrimination actions. But what about those white Americans who are made to be aware of their in-group privileges but who don't feel high in efficacy to make a difference? What happens next in the model in that case? We predict that we're quite good at finding ways not to feel guilty. So if I'm made to be aware of my illegitimate advantages, but I feel there's nothing I can really do about it, then I'm not going to feel guilty. There's no purpose for me to feel guilty because there's nothing I can do about it. So I'm going to reject those feelings of collective guilt. And if we don't have that part of the model, then you're not going to get improved intergroup attitudes. You're not going to get more anti-discrimination action. So 82 white students came to the lab and were met by a white experimenter who self-identified as a fellow university student and told the participant that they would have a choice of activities. For their first test, they could either complete a challenging math and reasoning task, or they could work with the experimenter on a personal project concerning racial equality on campus. 94% did choose the racial equality project. These are the participants I'll talk about from here on out. They read a passage describing the underrepresentation of African American faculty at their university. They were then asked to write a statement expressing the need for more African American professors to be sent to university chairpersons in hopes of facilitating change in future hirings. Participants in the high efficacy manipulation condition were told, "Thanks so much for your help on this project. We really think we're going to see a difference in hiring of African American faculty." We'd say there's about a 95% chance that through your efforts, the efforts of other students, we're really going to see a difference. So off you go to write. Or, "Thanks so much for your help on this project. Unfortunately, we're worried that it's not really going to be effective. We're pretty pessimistic about our odds. We'd guess there's probably only a 5% chance that we're going to see a real increase in the hiring of African American faculty." And finally, we had a moderate efficacy condition where students were told that there was approximately a 50-50 chance, we thought, that change would occur. The first task that participants completed was a measure of white guilt or collective white guilt. So one of the items, for example, was, "I feel guilty about white Americans' harmful actions toward African Americans." Then we completed our measures of intergroup attitudes and actions. So the second measure administered was the attitude toward blacks scale, another widely used measure of explicit racial prejudice. We introduce our concrete measure of anti-discrimination action. The experimenter said, "Hey, and you know what? I could really use your help on one other aspect of this project we're working on. We have these flyers that we want to put up on campus, lobbying for more African American faculty to be hired. Would you mind taking some flyers to post around campus?" So what each participant had was a file folder filled with 50 flyers, and participants were allowed in private to take however many flyers they thought they could distribute. And so then what we were able to do later is count how many were left from 50, and that gave us our measure of anti-discrimination action. Now what's unique about this study, what we think is a strength of the study, is that this is not self-reported willingness to engage in anti-discrimination action. This is a concrete measure of anti-discrimination action. How many flyers did you take to post on campus? We, as a final measure, included a measure of perceived efficacy. So we asked, how optimistic are you that representation of African American faculty on campus is going to increase? Participants told there was a 95% chance that there would be more hiring of African American faculty. In fact, felt more optimistic than did participants told there was only a 5% chance. And we found that participants giving 50-50 odds of reducing racial inequality also felt more optimistic about change. However, in the 50% moderate efficacy group and the high efficacy 95% change group, we didn't find a difference, which post hoc we speculated might be due to a baseline pessimism concerning the ability to impact institutionalized racism. So even a 50-50 shot might have seemed quite promising to our participants. So then we're left with really a low efficacy group and a higher efficacy group. So in our next step, we conducted structural equation modeling to test our proposed relationship among our key variables. So the efficacy manipulation, perceived efficacy, that efficacy item that we introduced at the very end, to collective guilt, our collective guilt measure, and intergroup attitudes, the attitude toward Black scale, and intergroup actions, simply how many anti-discrimination flyers did you take? So we found, as predicted, that higher perceived efficacy led directly to greater collective guilt in our white American participants. Participants made to be aware of privilege and efficacious to make a difference took more flyers lobbying for change, and this was mediated by an increase in collective guilt. However, we did not find what we speculated we would find in a direct link between higher perceived efficacy and improved intergroup attitudes. Any impact of efficacy on improved attitudes was mediated completely by collective guilt. So the path to produce attitude change was higher perceived efficacy to greater collective guilt to improved intergroup attitudes. So our take-home message is that increasing white Americans' awareness of the illegitimate advantages that they hold in society based on their group membership can be a powerful tool in reducing racial prejudice and in motivating white Americans to work toward creating greater racial equality in our society. But only when paired with efficacy. We have to, in our diversity training interventions, communicate to white Americans that they can make a difference, even a small difference, that they can be efficacious in making change happen. Otherwise, white Americans will reject feelings of collective guilt. And what our research shows quite clearly toward a goal of reducing prejudice and increasing anti-discrimination action is that guilt is good. Because of the deception that we used in the study, we had to have a very careful debriefing. So as a part of the debriefing, in addition to explaining our deception and the reason for the deception, that we also pointed them toward concrete steps that they could take to enact change, because we wanted our participants to leave with a feeling of being empowered to make a difference, and that in fact by participating in the study, they were making a difference.